Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. It has been a minute since I've posted a video because, well, I got married, I was planning my wedding, things were really hectic and crazy. The company I work for was starting offices here in Israel, so I was really thrown into a lot of work on that front. But now I have just a little bit more free time, so I'm getting back into filming these videos for all of you guys who I miss so much. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Of course, the market has entirely shifted and changed since basically the last time I posted a video. So let's go ahead and talk about the changing landscape and basically where we are at now. Right now, the US economy and even global economy are all basically like on the brink of recession. Everybody's got their fear radars going off. Let's go ahead and talk about whether or not, at least in the US, we're already in a recession or not. In Q1 of 2021, GDP fell by negative 1.6%, and then that was followed by another negative downturn in GDP by 0.9%. A commonly known definition of a recession is one where there are two back-to-back quarters where GDP falls, or basically GDP is negative. So in Q1 and Q2 of 2022, we have had two back-to-back quarters of negative GDP, which has led a lot of people to say, are we now in a recession? Well, it's not such a clear response, right? Because that definition is really just like an indicator. It's not a black and white rule. So it really still leaves up for question whether or not we are in fact actually in a recession. Now, it's obviously an indicator that we are getting very close to the brink of a recession, which has led to a lot of volatility in the market. The market took a huge downturn for like the first 6.5 to 7 months of the year. It is now just starting to take an uptick, basically like in the last 2 weeks, right before the time of me filming this. So the market really doesn't know what's going on. The market really was gearing up for a recession, but now the stock market is kind of rallying. And part of that rally actually came off the cuff of the federal chairman, Jerome Powell. According to Jerome Powell, he thinks that the US is not currently in a recession, and his reasoning is because there's too many parts of the economy that are just still like running very hot, meaning they're doing exceptionally well. For example, he points to the fact that the labor market is still kind of shooting through the roof. In the first half of the year alone, there were 2.7 million new jobs in the labor market alone. So examples like that are things that, Jerome Powell would point to as to why, we can't really be in a recession, because a recession wouldn't lead to so many new jobs being created. Usually in a recession, there's actually layoffs, downturns, and all of that type of jazz. Well, that obviously leads a lot of people wondering, well, we can't be in a good place if we have 2 quarters back to back of negative GDP. There are some experts that say that they attribute the negative GDP 2 quarters back to back really to artificial constraints that existed because of the pandemic and because, of the war going on in Ukraine. And so a lot of folks are saying that because of the supply chain shortages and the supply shortages generally that came from those 2 artificial types of events, that has led to a temporary downturn in GDP, but that will uptick as soon as supply chain lines are opened back up again, and hopefully the war resides. But war, famine, pandemic, these are things that happen in the world. So I don't know if that's just economists or Federal Reserve Chairman folks who are just trying to kind of make people feel better, because a lot of what's happening in the market is based on people's perception, right? If people are convinced that we're in a recession, that will quickly get us to a place where we actually are in a recession, right? And it will get us there a lot faster and probably a lot more severely. Whereas if you temper people's expectations, emotions, and sentiment, then even if you get to a recession, perhaps it's not as bad, perhaps it's not as quickly, and perhaps there's more you can do to mitigate it throughout the process. So according to the Federal Reserve, we're not yet in a recession, and in fact, the market is still running hot. Now, by running hot, they mean that, things are actually like at a surplus, right? Inflation is really high, jobs are really high. Obviously, stock market is not really high currently, but it did have a pretty strong rally though recently in response to what the Federal Reserve has said. So you can't let an economy run too hot for too long, because basically what will happen is the value of currency will continue to plummet, inflation will continue to rise at rapid rates. People's salary expectations will go through the roof because they'll need more money to maintain their lifestyles. Companies will not be able to keep up with the amount of money it takes to maintain these employees, and therefore companies will not be able to conduct their business properly, companies would be going out of business, it would just be a mess, right? So the Federal Reserve does have to press on the brakes, right, and cool off the market, cool off all of the inflation that's been going on and just the madness that was going on prior to the downturn in the market, right? And one of the tools that the Federal Reserve uses to do that is to change interest rates. So in the past, basically half a year, the Federal Reserve has been slowly raising interest rates by another 0.75%. That gets us to about 2.5% that they've raised interest rates in recent months. By raising interest rates, essentially what they're doing is people are not able to borrow money as cheaply, right? If you're going to go to the bank for a loan, then there's going to be more interest that accrues on that. You're going to be charged a higher interest rate on your repayment, and therefore it disincentivizes you to borrow money if it is difficult for you to pay back at that interest rate, right? So for example, the housing market had gotten really hot because people were able to take out mortgages on homes at very low interest rates. So many people were running to the bank and so many people were running to buy homes, which was driving demand for homes up, prices for homes up. And obviously was leading to like inflation in the housing market. So now by raising interest rates, that is going to slow down the demand for houses, for homes, for mortgages, and all of that, which should help cool off the housing market. That's just one example of how by raising the interest rates, the Federal Reserve can kind of help cool off a market and keep things in check, right? So that also exists in any facet of life where you might be borrowing or taking out money, car loans, anything like that, right? So essentially the Federal Reserve uses interest rates as a tool. Another example is, you might stick money in the stock market because you're not able to get any interest on your savings account, but when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, you can get a higher interest by putting your money in a savings account, right? So some people might not be investing in stocks as much. They might choose to take the safer route and maybe get 2% on a high yield savings account rather than the potential volatility of an unknown stock market specifically. So the way that I like to think about this is basically using a kind of a car analogy, right? If the market is running too hot and the Federal Reserve doesn't come in to cool things off by raising interest rates, then it's going to be like a car that is just going at a rapid pace that's going to spin out of control. And the Federal Reserve has to come in and basically raise interest rates to hit the brakes on this car in the hopes that they can stop the car before it just goes off a cliff, right? From going too fast. So it is having an impact on the market. It is going to slow down inflation, and it is going to, eventually have an impact in the housing market. It has had an impact in the stock market, and it's possible we still end up in a recession. But the fact of the matter is that the recession won't be as bad as what it would have been had the Fed not stepped in and started to raise interest rates when they did. According to Goldman Sachs, there's going to actually potentially be more hike rates that are going to come down the pipeline later this year and potentially early next year. So according to them, we should be expecting additional hike rates that will be coming from the Federal Reserve. We're obviously heading in the direction of a recession, if not on the brink of a recession, but the Federal Reserve has stepped in to try to cool things off. Inflation had hit over 9% inflation, so we really need some interest rate hikes. Even the fact that they've raised it 2.5% is great, but that obviously doesn't get us to that 9% figure of inflation. So we should be prepared that there might be more interest rate hikes down the pipeline, but just know it's kind of a necessary evil at this stage. And whether or not the market will fall is based on public perception about how bad this recession is really going to be and whether the Federal Reserve has a handle on everything. But ultimately, just know that this is the best time to be buying, right? While the market is down, and if the market turns back down even further, I would just really encourage you to have some money in savings, have some money in reserves, and put some of that, but not all of that, towards buying. Even if you're buying just something that tracks the S&P 500 over time, that will go up once we get out of this potential recession territory, right? But anyways, now is really the time to be buying and saving simultaneously, right? So I would definitely encourage you to keep quite a bit more savings than usual and to be looking for some really good buying opportunities, and just continue to dollar cost average, right? Dollar cost averaging for the win. But anyways, thank you guys all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments below whether you think we're officially in recession territory or not. Love you all. Catch you in the next one.